In the grand saga of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were practically gods and their legacies carved in stone for eternity, one ruler achieved something truly extraordinary. He was almost entirely deleted. Not forgotten, mind you, but actively erased. Imagine being so universally unpopular, so utterly anathema to your society, that your successors implemented a historical delete all button. This isn't just a story of forgotten history, it's a cosmic conspiracy, a millennia-long cover-up, and the tale of a pharaoh who pulled off the ultimate historical disappearing act, almost. Who was this elusive monarch, and what did he do to deserve such a monumental scrubbing from existence? Our story begins, as many dramatic tales do, with a new face on the throne. Around 1353 BC, a young pharaoh named Amenhotep IV ascended. He inherited a prosperous, polytheistic empire, rich in tradition and dedicated to a pantheon of gods, with Amonisare as the undisputed heavyweight champion. Everything was, well, incredibly normal. The Nile flowed, the sun rose, and the priests of Amonisare held immense power. Young Amenhotep IV was expected to continue this grand tradition, maintain the status quo, and maybe build a fancy new temple or two. He was a pharaoh, after all, not a rebel with a cause, yet. But Amenhotep IV had other plans that would make even the most progressive modern-day politician blush. He decided to fundamentally alter the very fabric of Egyptian society. Forget polytheism, with its dozens of gods, sacred animals, and intricate rituals. Amenhotep IV was going minimalist. He decreed that Egypt would worship only one deity, Aten, the visible disk of the sun. This wasn't just a theological tweak, it was a bombshell dropped into the heart of Egyptian culture. It was akin to telling a bustling marketplace to suddenly only sell one type of fruit. Unprecedented, audacious, and frankly, a bit much for everyone involved. Under the new divine management, Aten was to be worshipped directly, without the need for traditional idols or complex mythological narratives. Akhenaten, as Amenhotep IV now styled himself, was the sole intermediary between humanity and Aten, essentially making himself the ultimate spiritual gatekeeper. Imagine the utter chaos this caused amongst the powerful priesthoods of Amonisare, who suddenly found their jobs outsourced by the pharaoh himself. This wasn't just a new god, it was a new religious business model, and Akhenaten was cutting out the middleman. For the everyday Egyptian, it was a drastic shift, a direct challenge to centuries of deeply ingrained belief. Talk about a culture shock. To truly cement his new vision, Akhenaten didn't just change the religion, he changed the postcode. He abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes, a city steeped in the traditions of Amonisare, and built an entirely new city from scratch, Akhenaten, or Horizon of the Aten. Today, we know it as Amarna. It was a purpose-built monument to his singular god, a blank slate for his revolutionary ideas. Grand temples dedicated to Aten, royal palaces, and sprawling residential areas all rose from the desert sands. This wasn't just a move, it was a statement. A very, very loud statement carved in stone, screaming new management, at the top of its lungs. Akhenaten's revolution wasn't confined to religion and urban planning, it even extended to art. Traditional Egyptian art was all about idealized, static forms, gods and pharaohs depicted with timeless perfection. But during the Amarna period, art underwent a shocking transformation. Suddenly, pharaohs and queens, including Akhenaten and Nefertiti, were shown with elongated features, noticeably swollen bellies, and a more naturalistic, almost intimate style. It was a radical departure, embracing a warts and all approach centuries before photography. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a gritty documentary replacing a heroic epic. It was certainly a bold artistic choice, and like everything else Akhenaten did, highly divisive. While Akhenaten was busy being a religious and artistic revolutionary at home, the empire's affairs abroad were, shall we say, less than stellar. His laser-like focus on Aten meant that the mundane business of foreign policy took a back seat. Letters from vassal states in the Levant, desperately pleading for aid against encroaching enemies, went largely unanswered. Egypt's influence in the region waned, and its diplomatic standing plummeted. It turns out that running an empire requires more than just spiritual enlightenment, it also needs a solid foreign affairs department. For many, Akhenaten's grand vision was coming at a very practical, and very dangerous, cost. Then, as dramatically as he appeared, Akhenaten vanished from the scene. His reign, a whirlwind of religious, artistic, and political upheaval, ended after approximately 17 years. The exact circumstances of his death are, of course, shrouded in the delightful ambiguity of ancient history. Was it natural causes? Was there some less than natural intervention from disgruntled priests or nobles who'd had quite enough of the Aten-centric lifestyle? We don't know for sure, but his departure left a massive vacuum, not just on the throne, but in the very soul of Egypt. And with that vacuum came an opportunity for those who desperately wanted to turn back the clock. Enter Akhenaten's successor, a young pharaoh initially named Akhenaten, meaning living image of Aten. But under the guiding hand of powerful regents, this young king quickly shed his Atenist affiliations. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, in a clear signal that the old gods were back in business. The capital was moved back to Thebes, the temples of Ammonius Ra were reopened, and the traditional religious festivals revived. It was less a gentle course correction and more a sharp U-turn, complete with screeching tires. Poor Tutankhamun, forever famous for his bling, was actually at the forefront of undoing his predecessor's entire life's work. What a legacy to inherit! But simply reversing Akhenaten's policies wasn't enough. The memory of the heretic king had to be extinguished, not just for practical reasons, but as a symbolic act of purification. What followed was one of history's most thorough and chilling campaigns of historical erasure. This wasn't passive neglect, it was an active, systematic effort to wipe Akhenaten from the collective consciousness, an ancient Egyptian delete button pressed with chisels and hammers. Every segment, every monument, every mention of his name had to go. It was a massive undertaking, requiring incredible coordination and commitment to oblivion. You have to wonder what they hoped to achieve by pretending he never existed. The primary targets were Akhenaten's name and images. Wherever they appeared, on temple walls, stelae, statues, or king lists, they were systematically chiseled out. His royal cartouche, which proudly bore his name, was meticulously obliterated, leaving an awkward, blank space. It's like trying to remove a controversial X from all your old photos, but with significantly more effort and a distinct lack of Photoshop. Furthermore, his reign was effectively cut out of official king lists, creating a chronological void between his father and his son. For centuries, Egyptian history would simply skip over him, a silent testament to the sheer power of collective historical amnesia. Akhenaten's carefully constructed capital, Akhenaten, suffered an equally grim fate. The city that was once a beacon of the Aten cult was systematically dismantled, stone by stone. Its grand temples and palaces were torn down, and their precisely cut blocks were unceremoniously hauled away to be reused in other building projects, often for the very gods Akhenaten had rejected. It was the ultimate architectural insult, turning his city of the sun into a quarry for his enemies. Imagine dedicating your life's work to building a grand vision, only for it to become raw material for the next guy's renovation project. Ouch. Talk about a hostile takeover of real estate. For generations, the Amarna period was considered a dark age, a time of heresy and instability that Egyptians preferred not to discuss. Akhenaten himself was referred to, if at all, as the heretic king, the rebel, or simply, that enemy from Akhenaten. His very existence became a historical taboo. It was a remarkable success for the ancient Egyptian PR team. They managed to scrub a whole pharaoh out of common knowledge for literally thousands of years. Imagine a world where people genuinely believed the Beatles were only 3 members, because John Lennon was just excised. That's the scale of this historical whitewash. Almost. Adding another layer to Akhenaten's historical disappearance, even his tomb was defaced, its contents likely desecrated. And perhaps the ultimate indignity for a pharaoh, his mummy was never definitively identified. For the ancient Egyptians, a properly preserved and identified mummy was crucial for the soul's journey to the afterlife. To have your tomb desecrated and your body lost to time was a profound spiritual punishment. It was the ultimate unpersoning, erasing him not just from history, but from eternity itself. The universe, it seemed, was fully on board with the ancient Egyptian cancellation campaign. Or so they thought. So for over 2 millennia, Akhenaten remained largely a phantom, a whisper of a forgotten name, or sometimes, not even that. His existence was actively denied, his monuments repurposed, and his legacy erased. The ancient Egyptians were incredibly good at this. Generations lived and died without ever knowing of this radical pharaoh who dared to challenge their deeply held beliefs. It's a stark reminder of how fragile historical memory can be, and how easily a narrative can be manipulated when you're dealing with chisels and unlimited state power. But here's the twist, the almost in our story. History, much like a stubborn cat, eventually reveals itself, often on its own terms. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, when European explorers and archaeologists, armed with shovels, curiosity, and probably too much tea, began unearthing the sands of Egypt. They stumbled upon the strange, unique ruins of a city unlike any other, Amarna. The artistic style was bizarre, the temples dedicated to a singular sun disk, and the names, well, many of the names had been chiseled out. But enough fragments remained, enough clues were scattered, for a story to begin to emerge from the desert dust. The discovery of Amarna was like finding a deleted scene in the ancient Egyptian blockbuster. Historians, like skilled detectives, began piecing together the fragmented narrative. They found inscriptions that, despite attempts at erasure, still faintly bore Akhenaten's name. They recognized the unique artistic style and the singular focus on Aten. It was a painstaking process, like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half have been crudely scratched out. But slowly, painstakingly, the story of Akhenaten, the Heretic king, began to re-emerge from the historical shadows. The conspiracy, after millennia, was finally unraveling. A crucial piece of evidence came in the form of the Amarna tablets, discovered by a local woman in 1887. These were diplomatic letters, written in Akkadian cuneiform, found in the ruins of Akhenaten. They weren't exactly a smoking gun about Akhenaten's personal life, but they certainly painted a vivid picture of the neglected foreign policy during his reign. They were desperate pleas from Egyptian vassals in Canaan for military aid, pleas that mostly fell on deaf ears. These tablets helped contextualize Akhenaten's rule, showing that while he was busy reinventing religion, the empire was slowly crumbling at its edges. History, it turns out, keeps receipts. Today, Akhenaten remains one of ancient Egypt's most fascinating and controversial figures. Was he a profound religious visionary, truly ahead of his time in advocating for monotheism? Was he a power-hungry tyrant, using religion as a tool to consolidate his own authority and crush the powerful priesthoods? Or was he simply a misguided idealist, whose grand experiment ultimately destabilized a great empire? There's no easy answer, and historians continue to debate his motivations and his impact. It's a testament to his radical nature that even after centuries of oblivion, and decades of rediscovery, he still manages to provoke such passionate arguments. So, why was the erasure so complete? It wasn't just a simple change of policy. Historians generally agree it was a combination of factors. The deep-seated religious conservatism of Egypt meant Akhenaten's monotheistic cult was seen as heresy, offending the gods and threatening cosmic order. His neglect of foreign policy weakened the empire. And perhaps most importantly, his reforms stripped power and wealth from the established priesthoods and nobility. The erasure was a profound political and religious act, a desperate attempt to restore stability and legitimate the new order by condemning the old. The stakes were high, and the chisels were sharp. Akhenaten's story serves as a chilling example of what happens when a society attempts to control its own narrative to such an extreme degree. For over 2 millennia, the ancient Egyptians successfully suppressed the memory of their most radical pharaoh. They deleted him from king lists, dismantled his city, and defaced his image. It was an astonishing achievement in historical manipulation. And yet, despite all that effort, history, tenacious as ever, eventually refused to stay buried. The fragments remained, the clues persisted, and the truth, or at least a version of it, found its way back into the light. So, the pharaoh who almost erased himself from history is now firmly back in our textbooks, a source of endless fascination and scholarly debate. He stands as a reminder that even the most powerful attempts to suppress the past can ultimately fail. Akhenaten challenged the very foundations of his world, and in turn, his world tried to erase him for it. But thanks to diligent archaeologists and the sheer stubbornness of ancient stones, his story survived, a testament to vision, controversy, and the enduring mystery of a king who dared to be different. He was almost a ghost in time, but the almost is what makes his story so compelling.